Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this user group session. We're very excited to go over how to automate your live map services and to see if you personally have any tips and tricks that you would like to share with us and the audience today. We'll have our support manager, Chris Millay, and our technical manager, Justin Forster, hosting this session. Just to go over how it works, the session will be broken into two parts. The first part will be Justin and Chris presenting our best practices when it comes to automating your live map services. After the presentation, we'll open the floor up for discussion. You can raise your hand by pressing the hand button, and we'll unmute you so that you can voice your questions or thoughts, or you can also type it in the chat. So there are multiple ways of doing this. And with that said, we'll begin with our first part of the session. So Chris and Justin, the floor is yours.
Right, so welcome. This is our second user group session. After the roaring success of the first one, we're looking forward to this one. So we thought we'd tackle a very interesting subject. Hopefully we can get it covered in the hour session that we're preparing, and to the level of knowledge that you guys would like to have from us. So feel free during this session to write the questions or in the chat anything you guys hear that you want to hear a little bit more about, and we will dive into as much as we can. If we can't handle it during this session, we will be reaching out to you separately and bringing you up to speed or setting up sessions either through Lorne or through the rest of the team. So today we wanted to look at, in particular, let me head back slide or two because we had it here, automating your live maps services, or AKA getting rid of distributed applications in SCOM the easy way. So that is a rather large subject which we're going to talk about these points. So we're going to talk about dynamic rules, how to set up computer groups, host referencing, maintenance, end user experience setup, and of course the valuable reporting part. Just to set the tone, so many of you, if not all of you, are aware that Live Maps has a feature in there that does services, or discovery of services, or creation of services, or importing of distributed applications into our service model. Now, the reason why we developed this a few years ago, business service management and modeling, was to handle a subject close to heart with a lot of admins with SCOM, was distributed applications, which is SCOM's mechanism to group data together and to make sense of it so that when people outside of the administration part or user level of SCOM start asking you for a very simple overview of, is my application working, or is email working, is the website up and running, that you had a very simple way to show them everything that supports it is there. So that's the prayer. In reality, what most customers do, or what most users of SCOM do, is naturally go and reach for things that they know, which are the computers that support the applications, because SCOM is very good at computer monitoring, and place them into the distributed application, which ends up in a pile of tears for most people, where the service or the distributed application part within SCOM is constantly read. So we tackled that problem a couple of years ago instead of avoiding it. We helped out a lot of our customers with introducing a very simple way to understand what's actually read in the application and break it down. And the reason why it's very easy for people just to get to that red box very fast is because there is no model applied to the distributed application modeling within SCOM. So, naturally, it's a blank canvas. You can put anything you want together. If you spend the hours, months, and days trying to plot out what needs to be in a distributed application, what doesn't need to be, you could get very close to what we've constantly been doing with our customers. Or you could even go down the other route of just dumping all the computers into the distributed application and starting the tuning process, which is great fun. So today we're going to talk about our model, what it does, the reason why it's very beneficial, how to make it automatic so that you don't have to do tuning and you don't have to worry and contemplate distributed applications. We're going to talk about a templating process as well that we do. So just to highlight that, here's our model, our distributed application model. That is the business service model. We separate it out into three major areas: end user, application, and infrastructure. And for those of you who have had conversations with me a while back, you will know that infrastructure doesn't mean the computers. What you may not know is that through a series of techniques, we're going to show you how to actually model the application and infrastructure area out of computer groups. And the computer groups can be made dynamic, which makes your service incredibly automated. So fire and forget if done correctly in Live Maps. The end user part, obviously, by natural default, should not be going from the computers and testing themselves. They should be from other agents in your environment, testing the websites, logging in, performing the SQL query tests, whatever you guys have come up with to manage the application. We're not going to dive into detail on what's possible there. There's a whole different scenario that we'll be handling in a few weeks' time about that. But just to know, this is, if modeled correctly, how you will be grouping the data together. Now, that might look very complicated, but to be honest, if we get the computer group done straight away, it unlocks the service mapping automation as well as the dashboards that everyone likes to see as the technical layer. So being able to see the CPU, the processor, the alerts, the comparison, giving you SCOM discovery abilities on it, and tuning, etc. So the computer group is a key to it. So those of you who do know me and have heard my speeches on don't put computers in the infrastructure layer will probably be having a silent giggle right now, where I now say computer groups are incredibly important. But I will reiterate, it's not part of the service map. It is an existing group that we're going to tie and relate everything to, which can automate your dashboards, your service modeling, your distributed applications, and SLO reports. Don't worry, we will come back into it. I think now we're off to the lab to show you what's going on with this. I didn't miss anything that you wanted to add on there, Chris?
No. You're good.
I tend to go on a bit, so feel free to stop me. So here's a real life SCOM. You guys may recognize it. It is our demo environment here, the one I use regularly. It's got some alerts and some components. So what we're going to do is talk about dynamically ruling components and what they are. But before we get started, I'm just going to highlight how to create a service and how to create a computer group. Key steps to how to automate your services. And I'm going to focus on a service that we don't do out of the box. So, your in-house services. So what you'll be using is the wizard in here, the create service wizard. You're going to be calling it, and everyone knows I can't spell, the name of your service, for example. I'll use user group service. And this is where I'm going to inform you that you could use this wizard in the standard way, which is allow it to create its own management pack and then manually go through and pick the objects that make up your service. But remembering that automation and what this topic's about, that's not the best way to use this. The most advanced way to use this is, instead of dragging objects across from the class, is just to go next, and then finish. Now, for purposes of saving time during this meeting, most of you will know this is not a quick process because we wait for the SCOM SDK. I have pre-created that service, so we actually have a service map ready to go for you here. User group service. So we will come back and start working on it. And this is where you can see the model and user application infrastructure sitting in there. Just to show you, there's no smoke and mirrors. Besides me recreating this, it's ready to go. Step 2 is about creating a computer group. Now, here's some key points for you to know. You're going to be using these wizards here. There are 3 major areas. Please see our other user group video for more explanations of them. For this one, I'm just going to keep it simple and focus on a create list option, which we're going to look at creating the computer group for the user group service. To do that, because this is an unsealed management pack we have to save into, SCOM has some specific rulings in its background that you have to target the management pack that you want to reference anything to. So here's, important tip number 1. Target the user group service folder here, found always under Live Map services, or the name of your service then. It will automatically pick the management pack that you created for that moment ago. Give this one a very easy name. Now, I would highly recommend your language variant of the word computers for the service. So in this case, user group service. I already have that group, so don't worry, Live Maps won't let me recreate it, but you would be creating it for your own computers in there. And I'd recommend the computers for user group because that makes your technical grouping dashboards very easy to spot the ones you're looking for. So naming conventions are the key. I'm not going to create that one because I already have it populated here for us.
Now, before you go further, I want to add something just because when I do this, I don't generally do it through the wizard there. I actually open up the folder structure on the left and navigate to where the service is, so you can right click on the service itself and add, you know, a list or a diagram or something at that point here. So there, just like everything in Windows, there's multiple ways to start the process. So.
Yep. I do like the way you approach it as well, Chris, because you do have a way to visibly see the computers are being stored in there.
Yeah, and this is also helpful only because when you start adding, you know, on a simple service, when you're talking about your application, your infrastructure, and applications, if I want to add other groups in here to reference, to drill down into, a lot of times I will add the list here first, because then I can add the tile onto like the application layer and then drag and drop and move it over as I go through. So I have a habit of creating my list or my diagrams directly this way instead of using the wizard, or even using the, you know, add sub dashboard option that's in the task to the right. I just always have a habit of doing it right from the folder structure. Yep. That is a me thing. I just like to do it that way.
I had this question from a German customer a while back, and I love them because they're really sticklers for naming conventions, more than myself even. As you'll notice, our wizard will populate a class or a group with reference to the service that it belongs to, so application components for underscore end user group. So here's a hint. I did it for the computers there, and I did it without brackets, but as Chris was referring to, when you do drill downs, it's always good to put brackets and the name of the service that group belongs to, because there's obviously also another way that you can go through and find your groups, which is just our group searcher, which only looks at the Live Maps components, or our service searcher. So having it in here with your brackets, so computers for user group, you'd see there. But if you want to find any group or dashboard within a certain service later on, just typing user will give you that. And as you can see, I get the groups that are already populated there as well, instead of having to go through the folder navigation experience. Yep. Now, this is what most standard customers would do, and what I usually see a lot of people do out of the box, and what I did initially in the beginning as well. You can come down here to the class navigator, and you can locate your computer. So for this case, I can just drag host 1 across into the computer group. Now that makes a static reference. So that reference is the GUID. Great if you've only got 1 or 2 computers. You're probably going to do a combination of that to create this computer group. But I'm lazy, and Live Maps is designed for lazy people to make it easier for them. So down here, which is why I love it, down here you have a rule adding system. This is dynamic rules, where you can actually get SCOM to constantly do that for you. So in here, I can come in and say, right, oh, naturally it'll pick Windows Server class. I want all of my Windows servers to go in here. So I'm going to give it a rule that matches that for me, which will be the matches wildcard, asterisk, add expression, and show matches. And you'll see a quick list here that I can make sure that actually gives me what I'm looking for. Only upon pressing OK does that rule get applied down here, and will add all of my computers to the group. Now, for your services, it's probably better to target your rule to narrow it down to just the components you want. So for this case, let me just put in, let me change the rule, going back in here and replacing it with asterisk with host asterisk, for example. It's just one combination. Update the expression. That should just, oh, let me just put it contains. It's going to be easier. Update the expression, show matches. There are multiple combinations. You just have to play with the one that works for you. I've just got 2 computers in here. So, you know, once I've got those computers in there, I can choose to save it here. But, you know, referencing our old user group back there, the first video, probably better to go straight to the service and start writing the dynamic rules for the service. But keep in mind, this group hasn't populated in SCOM, so your referencing rules are based around what is in SCOM when Live Maps caches. So you might not see objects from your dynamic rule later on. Now, we will be focusing on the dynamic rules and coming back to it. There is a couple of options you have here: a filter expression, hosted class, and hosted group membership. The hosted group membership is going to play a big role shortly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this group in here. And then I'm going to let that group roll out in SCOM. And then I'm going to show you what the hosted group membership rule can do into your services. Now, this is where you'll see how fast my SCOM demo environment is. Chris, you had some tips on the dynamic rules that you wanted to mention.
Yeah, so the second tab, which is the hosted class, that particular one, this is one of those areas where that can be helpful, only because what you're doing, you have to, yeah, go ahead and populate that up. So the three tabs kind of work independently of each other. So filtered expression is pretty easy to figure out as far as you know, what it's filtering out. You know, what you're usually looking for something like a naming convention. I do want to let you know that some of these property values work faster than others. A common thing I find is that somebody will come through and say, hey, I'm looking for computers with this particular naming convention. And a lot of times they'll go down and use either NetBIOS name or maybe DNS name. However, they find that sometimes it's slower in their environment, even the principal name. If you use display name, that tends to be a lot faster. And the reason is SCOM has a habit of going through and looking for the partial property names first, and display name is one of those. And then before, if that doesn't work out, then it goes into a larger check of the total property values, and things like NetBIOS and DNS names and things like that are in that other one. So you basically have added a step to your group calculations to figure out what's in the group. So I always use display name. It's always the fastest to try to pull out, especially when you're going to do a naming convention. Obviously, if you wanted to do something like off an organizational unit in AD, if that's the way you want to pull those things in, that's, you know, that was actually a question in our last users group, and we told you some really complicated way of doing it, and then I remembered that the organizational unit is a property of a Windows computer, so you could technically do it that way. So if that's the best way, obviously use the best way. But if you're going to use a naming convention, then do display name. Now, hosted class, the next one over, this one is always going to be slow. There's no way around it. Just remember, you're looking for the host of something. So in this case, you're looking for the host Windows servers that are hosting like a SQL server, or all of your IIS roles, or something along those lines. It's going to pull in a lot of servers, you know, to get the information. Just realize the size of your environment is going to determine how fast this works. I've seen it work really well in some environments that are really small, that have a decent SCOM environment going on. You know, I'd say less than 500 computers that it's actually monitoring. However, when you start looking at 2,000 computers, now it has to look at each one of those computers before it can figure out whether that's hosting a SQL server. This was a feature request that we had from a couple customers, and so we put it in there. It works great in some instances and not so great in others. So I always try to temper this one. This is probably the slowest of our membership rules that we have. So
yeah, the most common scenario I see with this one is when people want to put platforms together, like computers that host SQL, or computers that host or Hyper-V computers, or something like that, where it's not necessarily something you want to refine too quickly, but you do want to have a living group of stuff for references.
Yeah, but it does that particular rule works well here when we're talking about creating a group that we're not necessarily always going to be referencing in, you know, through a direct drill down or anywhere else. Really, we're just kind of referencing it to gather the group together and then turn around and load it into, as you'll see later, into the infrastructure or into the application, which will bring us to the host group membership, which we're going to do next. So,
Yeah, I'll just pause on that one because we will dive into it. If you want to see how a hosted class is best used and you want to cheat on it, any of you that run Citrix and have used the LiveMap Citrix out of the box services, there are a lot of computer groups put together using that hosted class one, because Citrix, it's got some really complex sort of roles that I needed to search for each individual focus. It's sitting in there. That's very handy because Citrix is sort of platform sort approach on its application layer. But have a look in your management packs as well, because if management packs are deploying roles on the server, so if you ever want to check that out, I'd recommend looking at the web front ends and going to an object explorer on the server, and each one of the classes on the left will be something that you could search through in the hosted class option here. Now for the filter expression, as Chris pointed out, there are lots of values that you want to see in here. Now I help customers find specific targets that they want to look at, right? And it's very common that people will type in a forest name or a forest domain or something like that, a field that they thought was really populated, fill in their components and find nothing. It's frustrating in this wizard, but keep in mind this wizard's only doing what you're telling it to do. And if you misspell something or you've picked a field that is equals to and it's not exactly there, yeah, then it will miss things. The trick to that one is you can locate it manually through the class locator. I'd recommend the Windows Server is the easiest if you're targeting the class, or look for the specific class that you're looking for. Hit properties on that one, and then unfortunately my zoom level is a bit bad on this, but anything that's in here is what you can look against. Those will be the actual fields against this class that you could search against. So, I mean, I've helped customers even look at IP ranges, which as long as they're populated here, you can search against as well. So if you're ever stuck for looking for something, or you've put in a rule and doesn't find anything, there's one of two scenarios. One is the wrong class that you're targeting. It happens very often with performance counters and stuff as well. Or potentially the properties are not where you think they should be. And keep in mind, some classes roll up to other classes as well. So just to give you an example of that one, Windows operating system is a class unto its own, and there is an operating system class. In fact, let me jump over because I'm going to be doing that now into my service. So back on the service mapping part, first thing to do, head to infrastructure. Using your newfound knowledge of dynamic rules, and because you really don't want to do this 6 times every time someone changes something in the environment, come in, open up the dynamic rule, and this time, because we're in infrastructure, and because you guys like a giggle, and Justin keeps on saying it, don't put computers in there, we're going to put in Windows operating system. Now, the Windows operating system, if I use the filter drop-down, you're going to see a lot of fields, including a relationship to the host. That's because the Windows Management Pack for Windows is very good. Now let me just show you the operating system class, which is designed to house not only Windows but Linux and all the other stuff as well. You have a few less options. That's what Chris was referring to. On some of the search strings are preloaded by SCOM as well. So this is a very basic class. That's what SCOM really looks at. So if you want to know the fastest search strings, it's these 4. But there's no host relationship. So keep in mind, targeting the right class does play a huge role. I see we have a question. I'm just going to answer that question right now. The question is the impact of this slow rule only during authoring? Do you want to take that one, Chris?
No. So the slow rule will basically, it impacts how, yes, it's definitely during the authoring process, because it'll take a while to preview on the page itself. However, when SCOM does its group calculations, it also takes SCOM a little bit later on to do that. I find that usually I find the hosted class, once it's in place, or even any of these rules, even if they take a while, once they're in place, they're usually pretty good. The group calculation doesn't, as long as your environment isn't changing a lot all the time, then it seems to be pretty good there. However, the hosted class sometimes, the best I can tell you is it just always seems to take a lot longer for things to populate in there. So if things change, it may be a while before something shows up, because it is putting a little bit of a stress on your SCOM environment when it's trying to do the group calculations and the health calculations for that particular group. that being said, you have to know your SCOM environment. I've seen it work really well and not have any impact. I've also seen it just drag, and I've done a hosted class in one SCOM environment that was really slow to begin with. I almost dreaded it when I started it, and I had to kill it because it would never finish previewing, and it almost never seemed to populate after I finally did get it saved. So eventually we just deleted that entire group and started over with different rules. So hopefully that answers that question.
When we get to multi-tiered dynamic rules, I think I'll come back and re-answer that question a bit more, because there are some influences on the queries as well. But as Chris does point out, the authoring process, so LiveMaps loads its own cache at the front end. While you're doing this authoring, it's just checking against its own cache. So that's going to be a good understanding of how fast it'll go in SCOM as well. Actually, once it's in SCOM and the computers are populated there, it does fly a lot faster. But as you'll see when you save your very first dashboard within LiveMaps, we do give you a warning of what you see here in our cache is preview, and what you see in SCOM can take a few more minutes for it to catch up, because obviously we rewrite the management pack during that save. So there is a time delay between SCOM catching on what we told it to do and it actually showing you the right calculation. And that's really down to your management servers and their group calculation. But that is a subject for a whole new user group, where we'll probably invite an MVP along if you guys want to go down that route. That is something that we are talking to a lot of our customers and helping them out with services at the moment in improving SCOM and just getting that really faster and more juice out of it. So back to the dynamic rule. So what you guys can see is I've added the operating systems. I'm just going to do it again because in infrastructure, the most common things we put in are operating system and disk and potentially network components. I find operating system and disk cover the most common questions, which is CPU and memory and disk space. Well, hey, there we go. So this is where we're going to use the host group membership. It's a very simple rule. So up in the top, move it away from Windows Server that is default on and look for the class you want. You have to make sure that this class does exist in your computer target group. So if you don't have this discovered on computers, don't expect it to show anything. But you could still write the rule and have it sit in here automatically, which means that when you do the discoveries on the computer, it automatically rolls into your service. Keep in mind, keeping this automated, that's a great thing. So you could write a rule. We'll do that just now in application where it doesn't find anything till you set up a component and you'll see it roll in. Logical disk, underneath the group target is very simple. You can just come in here and type in computers, and you will notice that you only get the group that's in the same management pack. Okay, so we will never target the wrong group, which is always good because we haven't sealed anything. We don't have to do all of that long process. It's right there. Hit add expression, show matches, and I instantly get a cover of all of the disks that are on those servers. Now, we're not going to go into editing the view and making this look beautiful, but I am going to say what I usually do at this stage is I pick the class for operating system and change that over to principal name just to make sure that I've got the right computers in here, which they should do because I got them in the computer group straight away. But how most people know their operating systems is by the computer name, which happens to be principal name. So these are my demo host 1 and 2s. That's infrastructure.
Do you click on that change class defaults, or do you always highlight it that way?
I highlight it because I only do it for these ones. You could do it here, and you could go in and change the logos and stuff, but I find it just quick and easy to do it on the operating system. Obviously, it's down to personal preference. And to be honest, in the web console, it does show the host name without me having to do this. I do this because the SCOM console doesn't. That struggles with showing a lot of text in there. So just switching over to principal name gives it a different factor. What might be also interesting to do on the label, just a side tangent, you could actually do multiples of these. So you could do other information as well around there. So let me just do principal name as well. And you can choose how they show. You can move them up and down. But you could do build numbers and config numbers, update numbers. All of that's possible to show as well. We have some customers who don't use the computers but use something else on it, for example. Application layer. So keep in mind, automating this again is dead easy. I don't have to go look for the specific components. I can just write some very common rules that I'd have in most of my applications. Don't forget, click host group membership first. Target, let's say, websites, because that'll be on most of your servers. And again, target the computer group for the user group, which you set up moments ago. Hey, show matches. And there's the website on there. And it gets as easy as this. I can copy the rule, which even loads in the computer groups for me. And then I can go IIS application pool, add expression, and I'll see my app pool starting to flow in, and so on and so forth. So this is where you can really start getting down to just pulling out the common classes that make the service. Now keep in mind, you want to narrow them down to the components that support your application. So we're going to show you just now how to do dynamic rules to target those specific components. But already by just doing this, you're locking out things that have nothing to do with the service. So your .NET agent, your config manager agent, I don't have those showing in the service at all. So already I'm building a service map that's going to be more likely to stay greener. And if something does go wrong, I immediately know where it is, right? Is it a role? Is it the computer? Or is it the end user just now? So now I'm going to write something. Hopefully we'll find some databases on here, if I've got the right computers in there. So I'll just take the broadest database class. This is the one where you're going to do a little bit more tuning on your rule. I don't have any databases. That's a pity. So I'm just going to cheat and pick a database class itself as if it was part of the computer group. But if you had the computer group rule still in there, this would still apply to it as well. So I can take a database contains operations manager. I know I have those running in my environment. Expression, let me just remove the computer group. So I'm going to ask you guys to use imagination because I don't have databases on the servers at the moment. I will come and add that rule back in there just now. But let's assume that that rule was applied and I haven't just deleted it. So what you'll get, hang on. Maybe I need to do SQL database class. My apologies.
Okay, so this is something that I find happens to me every now and then, and I don't know why, but basically a lot of times, especially if you hit clone, it's cloning because it sees that you were doing a host group membership. If I'm going to do something like that, I always just close out the rule, add a new one, and that way it's starting up in the filtered expression. And because if you start a rule that is in one of the tabs and then suddenly switch over to another tab, for some reason we seem to remember a little bit of the other one. So if it doesn't work,
I think I worked out what it is, Chris. It's the demo hosts don't actually host SQL. So now here's a way I can show you how to automate the group and the service. I'll grab the SQL server.
Yeah, well, I knew why it wasn't bringing up anything, but
don't tell the audience.
The rule though, every now and then where it jumped back to the host group membership, I run into that a couple times, and usually I have to close out my rule and basically start a new one. Once that's stable.
What I'll do the target host rule again now that I've got SQL, but this is a good highlight of how easy it is to manage the servers, right? If I've missed anything up or missed a computer or I have to remove one, it's as simple as just drag and drop the computer I missed, or make sure I write a rule that matches it. Now SQL is going to be the computer that I've noticed in most customers doesn't match a rule because you tend to call it SQL 1, 2, 3, 4 or SQL this or cluster SQL that. It doesn't relate to the application, so you can't write a dynamic rule to say show me all computers with email in the name or something like that for SQL. So that's going to be the one you're going to drag in mainly by itself. Now let's see if the cache is there already. So SQL databases in the computer group. Nope. Let me just refresh the cache.
Go ahead and add the rule, because I'm pretty sure that will show up. And then, because I do this quite often, if I know it's going to be there, like the SQL database or the especially when I start doing the infrastructure layer, when I'm adding the Windows OS and the operating system or the logical disks, when the group is still being saved, I go ahead and add the rule because I'm pretty sure it's going to show up here shortly, and it will after I've refreshed it.
Yeah, but I cheat.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do this as a cool tip. I wish we had like a little bell or something that went off. Hey, this is a tip. So imagine, a bell just went off, and here's a tip that you guys should definitely keep gold. Not many people know this, but there is a way to refresh the cache on Live Maps authoring console directly. If you hold left control and left shift and then press that refresh button up there, you would have noticed when I did it, my computer list suddenly popped out of classes here. That actually refreshes the cache against the SCOM console at that time, which means the computer group that I edited will now be actually stored in cache in authoring console. Which means when I write this rule, all of a sudden you can see all of these databases suddenly show up here. Voila. So that's now matching it. I don't have to wait for SCOM to catch up. I don't get irritated. I don't get a blank rule. Just refresh the cache. Keep in mind, the cache in SCOM or the group in SCOM has to be calculated for that to work. If you refresh the cache and SQL Server is not being calculated in there, you still want to have it as a target in your group. So golden tip. To answer the question that we had earlier, you notice when I added the rule, let me just edit it and add again. Well, let me just remove and add the rule again. We have a preview that pops up here. That's previewing how long that query takes to query our cache, the running cache, which is similar to what you'd see within the SCOM. So as you can see at one top level, it's not that slow impacting, but this will give you an indication of how fast that dashboard does load for users. Now, there are certain rules, i.e. things like show me all my Windows computers. Don't ever use that here, but it's a good example. That will definitely show this, slow this preview down. If you are waiting longer than a minute for this preview, you might want to reconsider changing the rule or sub-dashboarding the components into smaller sections. That gives you a faster experience on the upper level because we don't have to pull a group of components. We just pull one object being the group object in there. This is a common thing I get as questions from customers as well. And I look at their dashboard and they have, more than 120 objects on there. And the first question I go is, well, how do you know if anything's red? And the second question is, that takes a long time to load, doesn't it? And they all agree yes. And I say, well, break it down. Build a diagram dashboard and have subgroups in there. That's a possibility. So now I'm just going to edit the rule because I don't want half of those databases to support this service. I just want a particular database. So let's take Operations Manager because I got Operations Manager Data Warehouse in there. So what I can do is now I can switch from host group membership to filter expression. And as long as I target the same class, that rule will stay in there. So now I can apply a two-tiered rule system to it. So I can say, right, I don't have to worry about the host anymore because we know the computer. I want the database name to contain operations. Add that, you'll see it pop in and it becomes an AND rule, show matches, and voila. I reduce that down to a specific database. And you can keep going with that. So this changes to multiple expressions. But you can add another layer on here as well. So, I mean, if I really wanted to go down, I could do a database size string, log size, whatever I want to do, down to a specific owner, user access, whatever floats your boat, let's say. I'm going to just try and does not contain DW, because let's say I don't want my data warehouse in there. You're going to start seeing that rule slows down a little bit here, and this is what Chris was referring to. The more that you layer, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
The more complex this rule is, the harder it is on SCOM to calculate to figure it all out. So that's one thing I always try to get. I try to get it in the fewest number of passes that I can, even if that means that I can get it down to 2 or 1. And if I have to, I'll actually exclude members. So I've had a couple cases where a rule brings in and it brings in pretty much everything I want, but there's 2 or 3 other objects that happen to be from a DR site or something like that they don't want in there, or bringing in from dev. If that brings it in pretty quickly, then a lot of times I'll just exclude those members instead of trying to change the rule to add another layer onto it.
So to exclude members, so let me remove this rule and just get down to the Operations Manager rule. To exclude members, it's as simple as just right-click on the individual object and hit remove. So that matches the rule, but I've now tagged it as it should never be in the service. Doesn't delete it from SCOM, just places it in the excluded members part here. So I can also visually go in and make sure that I haven't excluded the wrong one. And if I ever want it back in, it's as simple as doing the same task there. It matches the rule, SCOM puts it back in. And you can keep on doing this with more components. So hopefully that gives you a quick reference. Now here's really great news. If I add another SQL Server in there, because we've suddenly gone to clustering this application, and it sees the databases on there, it will add those components here as well. So I could keep doing it. I could do the SQL engine. I could do all the components. I don't have to build it here anymore because the rule does that. All I have to do is drop the computer into the computer group. And hey presto, my service will auto update. Now, that's because we've targeted application and infrastructure to the computer group. That is gold. By the way, the computer group can be used for discoveries as well, because it is actually a SCOM group. So I did this with a customer earlier this morning, where we did some Windows services discoveries. So what we actually did was, back here on the membership rules, I added the rule for host group membership Windows services, which is what every service owner wants to see, specific services running on his computer. By default, SCOM won't show you any of them. You have to manually go and add them. And this is usually found out when you do run this rule and go, oh wow, there's absolutely nothing on there. That rule doesn't match anything, but I can still add it. And now I can go to SCOM and go and discover the Windows service in that computer group for only those computers, so SQL or the other two components, and it will automatically roll in here. I don't have to come back and redraw the diagram or the DA. It'll build up. Saves me so much extra work of having to rebuild the DA and putting the services in there as well. So keep on doing this, and you can re-edit this at any time. This is not just created once and forget about it. You can come back and edit the rules if you made a mistake. Show it to your service owners. They will tell you if they're interested in this application pool or this one. You know, you guys don't need to know the service inside or out. You need to be able to find someone who does and can tell you, hey, I'm not interested in default app pool. Can you just pull that out of there? I don't care about the alerts. And there you go. Out it goes. Now, end user. That's the only one that you can't target to the computer groups, which is by design and default. Very important. So what you will be doing is doing a membership rule and targeting your end user tests, which generally will fall into the 4 categories that you see SCOM very good at. So web availability, web transaction, port tests, database checks.
I'm going to add a little note in here. There's been a couple times that I haven't been able to find one because it was actually saved in an unsealed management pack. If you target like the web availability perspective, you'll find those there. So if you target either the perspective class or the web availability perspective class, a lot of times you'll find web monitors, transactions, however you want to look for them, that may be saved in unsealed management packs. You'll find them usually there, so you can still get them in there.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do now is, because we actually have the service up and running, is I'm going to show you what I tend to do during the installs to help get the end user box filled up. Just a quick sidestep. So this is where we'll go in and we'll target the end user test, the web application test. So the first step, user group, for example, I'm not going to run this one through, but it's very important now that I've got the service, as Chris just referred to. If you try to target it in another unsealed management pack, you won't see it. But put it in your Live Maps service management pack, it instantly is available to you because it's in the same unsealed management pack. So it's very important to do this. Here's another tip for automation. That also means that if you back up the management pack, you automatically back up the web tests as well. And you've got nice and everything that supports this application stored in one place. Oh, and you can do your overrides in here as well if you really want to live out on it. Feel free. That's why we build the management packs for you. And then you can go through the step of adding the monitors and tests. I'm not going to do that today. That's not the idea of it. But if I was to put anything in there, the only tip I'd give you is make sure that you match whatever search string you've got in here. So I just put underscore user just to stay in the theme. But you guys will probably put the web URLs or the name of the service in there. Here's a big hint on the web application one. If you target the name, it'll be what you've called it in SCOM, but if you target the parameters, it'll be what the URL is. So if you've got a different name for the application than the URL, which does happen with some applications that are not user-based, they're just ports or just web pages that a service needs to talk to, then you could use the parameters for web application monitoring test-based component. And again, if you're not totally certain of it, just head to the class. So web application monitoring, and of course you can just go in here and have a look at the properties. And I think it's got parameters in here. There. So that's the URL that I'm testing here, for example. Okay, I think that covers it, except for reporting, which I know everything's on for it. So by saving this, you'll automatically roll up that service map into SCOM, which means that all of your computers will now become available for you to start targeting reports against it. And you will have SLOs against the components running on the computers that support the application. So you immediately have an availability check against your infrastructure components. And it's not what most people struggle. And if you want, we've just released a really great ebook on this topic, where we go back and talk about the distributed applications. The main floor is obviously SCOM Bob did it with us. The main floor is the computers, where people will go and target the computer groups for their SLA reports and their SLO targets, and then scratch their head as to why it's constantly red and it has nothing to do with impacting the service. By targeting the operating system logical disk, you're actually getting the true availability of the server to the application, because as long as this is running, then the server is up. And that gets reflected in, let's use SCOM for this one, in the SLA or SLOs, let's cancel out, that are built within the service automatically for you. So let me scroll down some of the services I got here. I think the user one is down here still. It's just waiting to catch up, but I think the SLAs have been running since I've had it. So down here we have a moving flow chart of the SLAs. Give that a second to load. Where you'll see there's an infrastructure component built out that you can get the reporting based on that, and you can go into the service and automate that. Now, automating a report against this is very simple. You just hit the reporting side within SCOM and target this service that you've got. You could also target the SLA against the computer group, and that'll give you a comparison of how much work the computer is versus how available it's actually been if you want to do. And that is any report in here. I'm going to use our community report that's just been available. If you guys haven't downloaded it, please check it out. It's available for you now. The bad news is I think I'm on a bad resolution, so it might not show the target here. So I hope this works.
That's what you get for doing this on a Surface.
Yeah, Microsoft Service computers are great fun with their TechZoom. Unfortunately, there's a box here that allows me to target the groups. Don't take my word for it. Download the free management pack, plug it in. It's going to work with all of your SLAs that LiveMaps creates. You can target the SLA component in there instantly. I don't think I can even do it on the SCOM version, just because that text box won't show, because I'm on InZoom. So I'm going to stop there before I frustrate you guys even more. Get hold of the management pack, plug it in, see if it works for you on that side, and let us know, how automated your services are moving forward with this one, because, this is a great way to just make sure that this is zero work for you and fully, fleshed out. And you will start seeing, here it's coming in, so my application layer is health rolled up, that should go green. This is going to stay gray till I get the target component in there. And now if I add another computer, it will roll in here as well. Plus a little sidestep on it, back to the graph that we had. You also now have available that computer group for any reason whatsoever. So if you want to, create a health dashboard just for the computers, or you want to go into a technical dashboard, more of that on another session later, or my next blog article that's coming out, you'll have it straight away. So you can just see a quick health state against the computers that you created in the group. Keep in mind, you can also search against the infrastructure part of user group, which is this one here, but there are no computers in there, so you won't find anything against it. That's why it's always handy to have the computer group for other reasons as well. I think that covers all of our agenda topics, Chris.
Yeah,
So
there's There's only a couple
Yeah.
other things that I kind of wanted to talk about real quick on obviously this was about automating services. The way we automate services is through membership rules. Those membership rules can be used on any and everything. So if you create a single dashboard, a list or something like that, then you can still use those same membership rules to bring things in. Obviously, the more you use the membership rules, the more dynamic your dashboards are, the less you have to worry about, constantly editing the dashboards later on. The only other thing that I wanted to bring up that I just remembered when we talked about the infrastructure side, there's what I find a lot of people will try to do is add the agent watchers. So they'll look at the health service agent watcher, realize that does not that is not hosted on any one of those computers. It's actually hosted on your SCOM management servers. So you won't be able to do a host group membership type of rule through there. So you will have to do like a filtered expression. The good news is that the name of the service is going to be the name of the computer. So I also find that it helps to have that in the infrastructure, just because there are times when I've seen it multiple times in SCOM where, and this is a common thing from a service perspective, from a support perspective, I find that people will turn around and say, "Hey, look up health agent." I guess that works too.
Sorry. Yep. Yeah, I was going to pull the agent. So these are the agents on the computers. They do match the computers that you're on, and then you have the health agent. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I look up the health agent watcher because that's probably far more important, only because it will tell you whether your agent is actually reporting correctly. I have actually seen SCOM report that the agent is green, the computer is green, everything is green underneath the computer and all the host, but the watcher says that it's red. Health Service Watcher Agent, yeah, that one. That one I find is extremely helpful, especially at an infrastructure level, to make sure and show that the health of all of the objects that you're looking at for your computer are actually healthy, at least as SCOM sees them. I literally have seen false reports where it says the computer's green, but you look at the watcher and the watcher shows it's red, and that just proves one thing, that the agent is not reporting correctly. So you have to do like you either have to restart the agent on that computer, or you have to do flush the health state cache of the agent, and then everything starts to roll up correctly. So that is a common issue that comes up. Well, I wouldn't say it's common, but it happens enough that I get tickets on it. So we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think, and also a good comparison to that one is when you can start using this dashboard. That's that column there. So this one we need to keep an eye on. But I know that computer I've got switched off now, so or at least partially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know we're running long, so we probably should wrap up at least the first part, and then we can open up to question and answers.
Just one last note then, for those of you hanging into the very end, we have another session coming up on March the 29th, which right now we've got focusing on diagramming in LiveMap, so where we didn't dive down into how to draw out your relationships and how to do a Visio representation of your data. That will be available for you on March the 29th. So it will be recorded if you can't make it, but we appreciate you being there, and definitely we'll be able to answer your questions in real time.